So good evening and welcome. I'd like to call the Council Business Planning Committee of the Whole Economic Development meeting for June 20th, 2018 to order. I am your chair, Paul McPherson, and tonight we have with us, well, first of all, I'll let you know who we don't have with us. Councilors Timmers, Rajima, and Brunei are absent tonight. To my far left, we have our CAO, Mike Kirkopoulos. Beside Mike, Mayor Sandra Easton, Councillor John Pachariva, Councillor Wayne McMillan. To my immediate left, we have our Economic Development Officer, Paul Deaney. To my right, we have our, and I got to get this new title correct, our Town Clerk, Julie Kirkolos. We have Councillor Rob Foster, Councillor Dave Thompson. On the back row here, we have our Director of Public Works, Dave Graham. And with her sign out front, we have our Director of Community Services, Shannon McKay. We have our Senior Communications Advisor, Carrie Beatty. And we also have with us Matt over here from IT. So welcome all. We do have a declaration of interest tonight from Councillor Thompson as regards to report AD 1809, the Magic Bus report, as Councillor Thompson's employer is possibly going to provide internet connections to the Magic Bus. So we thank you for submitting that. Are there any other declarations? Seeing none. Confirmation of agenda. Do any members have any changes to the order of business detailed in the agenda? Seeing none. Tonight we have three delegations. The first delegation is Mr. Brian Purdy, General Manager of Niagara Gateway Information Center, to provide a presentation and video on visitor tourist advertising resource. Brian, please come forward and proceed with your presentation.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, committee members. I want to update you on the rebirth of Niagara's key tourism marketing facility. It's the Niagara Gateway Information Center. First, here are some numbers I want to impress you with. 3,000 a day, 21,000 a week, 90,000 a month, and 1,095,000 a year. A bit more on these numbers in just a minute. I'm General Manager of the Niagara Gateway Information Center, ideally located at the Gateway to Niagara in Grimsby, at the QE and Casablanca intersection. We manage this tourism kiosk, an important highway destination, supplying one-on-one welcoming to thousands of visitors who are all heading to all four corners of Niagara. We are up and running with a 5-year lease. It's a partnership with the Niagara region and the Tourism Partnership of Niagara. The numbers I just mentioned are for the Welcome Center and food courts. To the end of May, based on a 4-day week schedule, we documented over 12,000 visitors at our kiosk and expect to have well over 35,000 stop in to meet us by the end of the year. We are supported solely by advertising and have 20 prominent backlit posters for rent, some only 20 feet from the Tim Hortons serving counter and the food court eating areas. Also available are other advertising formats, including our brochure racks and TV displays. We have a contract with Intrigue Media, allowing us to sell extended TV advertising in 13 other regions outlets of Niagara. Magnificent Tours in Niagara Falls have contracted us as their sole agent for their tour ticket sales. Our clients include Skylon, Ripley's, Hornblower, Greg Freeman Theatre, O Canada A, Marineland, Camping in Ontario, Bird Kingdom, Best Western, Great West Lodge, and Wild Play, just to name a few. Not a bad list for only 5 months of operation. One of our clients, a Stony Creek retailer, changes his posters every month, promoting his local sales events. Great use for retail marketing. Remember, $90,000 a month. The town of Grimsby moved into our kiosk just last week, renting the right-hand booth and counter area. We are a member of all 8 Niagara Chambers of Commerce. In our first 5 months of 2018, we logged over 500 volunteer hours. Our volunteers are a dedicated group who love what Niagara has to offer and, as ambassadors, pass on their enthusiasm and knowledge face to face. I'm going to show you our sales promotion video designed to bring you into the kiosk right from the QE and show off our advertising options. And I pressed it. Oh, one moment, please. It was the bottom box there. There we go. Thank you.
For many thousands of visitors heading to Niagara, their first stop is always the Grimsby Welcome Center. Very visible, it is off the QEW at Casablanca. This busy facility houses the Niagara Gateway Information Center, an important tourist hub. Guests enjoy one-to-one conversations to learn details on activities and events all across the Niagara region. In a 3-month period this summer, we hosted travelers from Alaska, Australia, Brazil, Bucharest, Cayman Islands, Finland, Germany, Guatemala, Hawaii, Ireland, Malaysia, Mexico, Poland, and Switzerland. From May to September, we logged in excess of 9,000 visitors. The Niagara Gateway kiosk can directly reach your target demographics with cost efficiency, giving direct exposure to tens of thousands of annual visitors. Guests want to know where to go before and after they visit the falls while staying in Niagara. Our direct advertising exposure through backlit posters shows off what your business has to offer, colorfully and affordably. The dynamic video wall separates your business from the competition, bringing life to your message. These are 15, 30, or 45-second ads uploaded from a Niagara video production studio. All screens run independently. Visitors look for guidance from Niagara region maps, guides, and flyers, available at our brochure rack. A physical brochure in the palm of a visitor's hand is an excellent takeaway for exclusive discount deals. They give insight and information about your business, ensuring visits to your location. Let the Niagara Gateway Information Center become a part of your distribution network for your coupon program. It's simple. Leave the coupons with us, we stamp them, and you gain customers. There is a 120 square foot office area available with a customer counter designed to capture foot traffic. It is ideal for festivals and events. In the next year, we anticipate over 35,000 sign-ins, and with our one-to-one counselors, they will know where to find Niagara's best destinations. The Niagara Gateway Information Center is a one-stop shopping venue, providing the personal touch to thousands of travelers' questions as they head out to all 4 corners of Niagara.
This initiative is an excellent example of what's turned into be a private-public partnership. Our motto is serving 12 municipalities and all 4 corners of Niagara. Thank you for the opportunity to bring this vital Niagara marketing facility to your attention. We're open for business, so come on in. Thank you.
Very good. Thank you, Brian. Is there any questions? I guess I have one question, and that would be, Lincoln content and how that is communicated out.
The strongest selling that we have, and we almost had a bidding war, are the posters, brand-new backlit posters on the walls outside the kiosk. First of all, to attract attention and to bring awareness of what's around. And facing the food court with those kind of numbers when they come in. Then to come into the kiosk and have brochures available. Our people act as salespeople. And somebody wants to, well, we're going to go to the falls, what do we do afterward? Well, let's go to a wine route. Let's go to a historical site or something like that. So we are there acting as your salespeople as well. I would also suggest video linkage showing perhaps a montage of things that are right from Lincoln, different things that are taken around the area. And that will also be available on our website. And then there's the other opportunities I mentioned with Intrigue of going to 13 other locations. They're in some restaurants around Niagara. And they're small dollars, but you're getting the same video broadcast for a period of time. You can buy them for 3 or 4 months. You don't have to buy them for a year. You can pick and choose your locations. So once again, you're getting that recognition around the Niagara region.
Good, good. Well, I commend you for your determination. I know there was a time when it was maybe not going to carry on, and you stuck with it, and looks like it's now up and running very well. So good for you.
Thank you.
Councillor Thompson. Oh, you had. Did I miss your question?
All right, go with Councilor Thompson and I'll follow up.
You got to get your hand up.
It was up pretty high.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Through you, thanks for the presentation this evening. I'm going to sort of piggyback on the chair's question. Of the overall inventory of businesses that promote themselves at the Gateway, what would you say the number of Lincoln businesses are, or percentage, or that sort of thing?
At the moment, zero.
Zero.
There's nobody represented there at all from Lincoln.
Okay, and is there, other than coming to councils, is there some sort of marketing that you do to the businesses in order to get them to know that you're, there's an opportunity for them there?
Yes, we've tapped into a few, including 20 Valley and so forth, but part of the problem was getting us up and going in January. There's a lot of going on last year. We ran the booth for 12 months last year, free of charge from landlord, with just volunteers on weekends. We were really open for business January 1st. That's when we could go out and sell things and go to people. So a lot of budgets had been pre-established by then. And we'll be working at that next September and October to fit into existing budgets and be able to develop packages for people.
If I might, Mr. Chair. Sure. So what you're saying is at this time you don't really have packages for people other than the video stuff, or?
Yes, we have a sales brochure.
Okay, but you don't have any feet on the street actually going out?
Yes,
active.
I have a full-time salesman, and we've tapped into some of the areas, including Lincoln itself and 20 Valley, who didn't have budget for it.
Ah, okay. All right, very good. Thank you.
Councillor Pachariba, floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I might be a while. Brian, thank you very much for your presentation. Just wondering your relationship with the TPN. So did they help you negotiate the lease with and I forget the name of the company that was running it.
That is the Welcome Center. They're owned by 3 owners. Just a little history. The previous lease was a 5-year lease with the region. The region signed it. It was $80,000 a year for 5 years. When that lease was up, they decided not to be in the tourist business. So I made a presentation at a couple of places, but I went back to the landlord and said, and renegotiated a lease for 5 years at $12,000 a year, a $68,000 saving over a period of 5 years, about $340,000. That kept it going. Interesting enough, the vote at the region was 20-4 to keep it going. 4 councillors did not want it to open. And we got that going. It was passed by the region, and it was asked that there be some sort of funnel for it. So the TPN gets the check from the region, they pass it on to the landlord. And we are the tenant.
Okay, so there's just simply a conduit, right now?
I'm sorry?
There's simply a conduit to pass the
That's
money
right, that's
through.
correct.
Okay.
And the region allocated 15,000 to allow 3,000 for expenses in hydro and so forth. So that's been approved by the region.
Yeah, well, and that's fantastic news, because initially, I mean, you were, and that was the whole crux of the information center, is you were being charged the same rate as the vendors, as the food vendors in the food court, and it was just unsustainable. I've got to say, your diplomacy is outstanding, because I'd say that for $500 a year to display a brochure and a map, and you couldn't find that in the budget, then you shouldn't be in the tourism business. Knowing that the information center used to go through 20,000 maps a year, and the majority of those in the summer, in the high season, I think it's almost reprehensible that there is no presence there, and I find that appalling. The simple fact, too, that you only charge 10% to sell tickets to events, I mean, again, that's another winner, and with both of the OTIC centers located, the one on Stanley Avenue and the 420, and then the other one located at the base of the Skyway, are both going eastbound. You're the, I mean, I'm preaching to the choir here. You're the gateway to Niagara.
That's it.
So, yeah, I don't understand why they aren't there. I mean, that money should be easily found, and you did it last year for free, so to me, that's a no-brainer. So, maybe through, this committee here, we can reach out to some of those businesses, some of those memberships, and say, it's excellent value, the work that you do. I wish you all the best. Anything I can do to help you, you let me know. And one of the things, too, we were talking about earlier is the Tourism Partnership, when they did their background study, they used the Y Partnership from Orlando, Florida. They're the ones that are the marketing machine behind Disney. And in the report, the main, and this has always stuck with me, if you're going to be in the tourism business, you need to control the messaging. And controlling the messaging is an information center. So you're either in the game or you're out of the game. So the simple fact that the other areas in Niagara aren't part of this, we've got to get them all together in some way, shape, or form. And I think now that the region's not in the tourism business, that's up to the TPN. And it was harder for them to do it based on 12 municipalities, is that they developed the 4 subregions. So surely, they can give you some presence there. And you see the big players in the falls, the parks, you're selling their tickets. So it's a head scratcher for me anyway.
If I might comment, the people that are buying the brochures understand, and we're getting boxes of them in. When they come in, we have a ledger. We say when the boxes come in, how many they are. When they get short, we go back to our clients and say we need to restock. So we're keeping track of that. And they're saying, oh, we got to print some more. So the people who understand that, and the people like the Skylines and Ripley's that are buying those backlit posters understand it. Yeah. Some of these others don't, or they haven't had the budget in the past. And a lot of the things that we've been reacting to is, of course, it was all free last year. Well, why do we have to pay $500? Well, we got to pay somebody to be there, et cetera, insurance and accounting, all those kind of costs. So we are a business, and that's how I'm trying to construct it and have it run that way.
Yeah, no, and the simple fact, too, that you, through you, Mr. Chairman, if I may, the simple fact, too, that you stamp the items that, that are given out, that's a simple tracking marketing tool that can be easily referred back to, to find your return on investment. So, and I know, some of the wineries that I've dealt with in the past, that's a qualified person that's coming to their place of business with that gateway stamp on it, is that they've already been vetted and they're looking for something.
So when they are our clients, we tend to sell them a bit more. And the perfect example of that is Bird Kingdom. They're stamped, and every month we get a check back from them. It's $1 a person we get. And we do nothing but stamp it, and we get the money back. So that's how that one works.
You're good?
I'm good.
Good. Mary Easton.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Thank you very much, Brian. I really can't say enough about the effort that you all have put into this. And so I'm very interested to hear that you not only have a lease, but you have, and that was a painful thing, but you also have money to pay staff, which is, I think, is a big relief for the volunteers for sure. It is a very busy place. I was only there a couple of times, but very, very, very busy, and people very enthusiastic about the information that they're given, no question about it. The fact that there isn't an obvious fit at the moment, which is not the fault of what you are doing, it's just that we are not very mature with our economic development plans. So therefore, it's difficult to know exactly where this is going to fit. So I can see that, you know, and maybe Mr. Deanny will speak to this as well, you know, ongoing dialogue and keeping track of what's going on is going to be very important. But we just don't have that agenda yet. And people, when I was there, they were very interested in what was going on in Niagara Falls. However, we are not offering them any kind of an agenda to get them to come off the road before. So that's certainly something that we need to be looking at. So I hope that we won't have to argue for every dime in the future. There is not good support at the region. That was really clear. It was a big stretch to find a mechanism for getting the lease signed, and I think in the end it was done differently. It wasn't really what was laid out there, but there was no appetite for it. Clearly not a good understanding of anything except what's going on in Niagara Falls. So that's always a big discouragement, but I believe that now that we have are beginning to come forward with the plan here. We're going to hear more about our economic development plan this evening, that there's going to be more hope, and we'll be able to see in the future exactly where this will fit. But I fear without your tenacity, this would have died a death by 1,000 cuts, because it was just not in a good place at all. So thank you very much for all of that, and I think we just you have to stay in touch with us, because that's until we get more of an agenda here, it's not really number one on the list at the moment, but it's certainly not out of an understanding of how important it could be. Thank you.
Thank you.
So I am going to give the last word to Paul Deanny.
Thank you, Chair. Through you to the committee, I actually had a few weeks ago had the pleasure of touring the facility with Mr. Purdy, and in the, I think, 20 minutes that I was there, I actually saw probably about 20 or 30 people come through the kiosk and grab some brochures and ask some questions. So, you know, the mayor is accurate in the sense that as we build out our economic development strategy, which is going to recommend obviously a tourism strategy, and as we build out our 2019 budget for some tourism and marketing, we do look forward to revisiting and speaking with Mr. Purdy on how we can actually tap into the tourism strength that the Gateway Center does have. So, Mr. Purdy, thank you for coming this evening.
Oh, yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, Brian.
I'm not sure how to retrieve the...
You're good to go. Yeah, thank you.
Do you know how to...
The CD back in your sleeve.
There it is. Got it. Oh,
I've given you back the CD.
oh, okay. There we go. You're ahead of me. Thank you.
Okay, so our next presenter is Adam Durant. I see, Adam, that you're solo tonight from Niagara Workforce Planning Board to present Lincoln Update, Local Trends in Job Demand, Tourism, and Agriculture. So when you are ready, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just give me a moment to get the slides up. Okay.
Go ahead. Sure. Yeah.
Sorry, thank you, Chair. Through you to the committee. Just while Adam is getting his presentation ready, I just wanted to sort of welcome him here this evening. Mario Di Davidis, unfortunately, couldn't be here this evening, but obviously Adam is well equipped in terms of the presentation and the documents that he's going to be presenting this evening. I did have the pleasure, along with our communications advisor, Ms. Beatty sitting through a presentation a couple weeks back now, if I recall correctly, in terms of the labor force indicators in agriculture and agricultural supporting industries. So we did ask the Niagara Workforce Planning Board to come here this evening to present those numbers. In addition, some tourism numbers that we've asked the Workforce Planning Board to investigate on our behalf. So further to that, Adam, over to you.
Great. So thank you, Mr. Chair, Madam Mayor, Council. Appreciate the opportunity to come speak tonight. Yeah, Mario is unfortunately not here. He's at home. His daughter's unwell, so he's asked me to take care of things. So it's my pleasure to be here and speak in the hot seat for the first time ever before any council. So I'll attempt to do this as best I possibly can, not put anyone to sleep, not cause any diplomatic incidents. So the agenda, as Paul has already gone through, is just a quick review of some agriculture data that we put together for a research project that we presented in April, an overview of the tourism report that we prepared for the town of Lincoln, and some next steps on how we can start putting some of those methodologies together and start developing some really interesting data projects that I think are going to support council through economic development activities and strategic planning activities. So without any further ado, I will jump right into things. So our agriculture project was something that we did at the request of the Ministry of Advanced Education and Skills Development. They're our primary funder. They approached NWPB and said, give us a small win. So we worked with our partners in Niagara Region Economic Development to ascertain what they needed help with, and the answer that came back was to get a better understanding of the labor force challenges of agricultural employers, and more importantly, the employers in Niagara who support agriculture either through goods and services. This presents something as a challenge because there is no obvious and easy way to measure supporting agriculture. There's no national North American Industrial Classification Code. There's no occupation code. So what we ended up with was a very new methodology that we vetted with some of our colleagues at Brock University and Niagara College. We looked at the 5 points that you see on the presentation here: hiring, retirements, retention, professional development, automation, succession planning. We engaged with 78 businesses to do this. We don't know if that's a representative sample because we don't know our population size. So as is the case with research very often, we've got many more questions coming out of this than we did immediate answers. On the one hand, that's sort of set our research agenda with respect to agriculture for the next 5 years. So these are issues that we're going to begin to address in turn as we move forward. What we brought tonight and the substance of this report is on our website, niagaraworkforce.ca, under our region building heading. So we'd invite council to have a review of that document at your leisure. If we tried to do everything tonight, we'd be here for way too long. So Lincoln was the foremost supporter of this project in terms of employers who responded to it. St. Catharines and Niagara-on-the-Lake were also high on that list. We made every effort to engage all communities in Niagara. We didn't want this to be seen as a research project that was focused on North Niagara versus South or West versus East. We had a research team of 3 graduate students who went out physically, met with employers, talked with them on the phone, heard everything they had to say. So this wasn't a survey where we just pushed it out the door and expected people to respond. We wanted to show the value and respect the value of the employer's time working through this data. So we think we had a really strong turnout on that front. We've also identified the areas where we want to improve the next time we deliver this project. This slide, and I apologize for the typo on there. I have 2 figures, one rounded up and one saying the exact same thing, the 4th bullet point down. We were very excited about it, so that's why we had the duplication there. Among the employers we spoke with, we had almost 80% reporting that they were hiring, and that totaled out to 574 people that they hired in 2017. And we see the breakdown of the occupation groups. We drilled those down to a much deeper level than what's on display here. So when we look at natural resources, agriculture-related production occupation, the entire spectrum of agricultural employment is captured within the subset of that data. So this is a very rich data set that we were able to construct from this, but it also illustrated the few challenges for these employers. First and foremost being almost 60% said that their hiring process was either difficult or very difficult. Very difficult was the maximum rating they could give to that, and half said that they rated the availability of labor in Niagara as either low or very low, and very low being the bottom of that particular scale. What was telling on this was when we asked why, what was informing these challenges, and the response to that was soft skills. So these are your communications, interpersonal skills, were consistently coming up below what our employers were expecting from the workforce. So this forces us to take a step back from discourses of skill shortages being very technically focused, people not having the right precision skills, people not having the right education or training, and now look at this in the context of employers saying, no, it's the interpersonal, the soft skills, the interviewing skills, the customer-facing skills that are making it difficult for them to hire and retain talent. So extremely fascinating results coming from that. Sorry. I am all over the grid here. My apologies. There we go. So moving into the tourism side of things, again, there's much more to this report, but for the sake of time, we want to keep things swift here. The tourism report that we prepared for the town of Lincoln was derived from a national level methodology that Statistics Canada and Tourism HR Canada developed in 2009. So this was a very broadly focused methodology, and it was designed to solve a problem that there, again, is no tourism industry that is measured through conventional means. We know that tourism exists and we know it drives the economy, but there's no single industry we pin it down to. There's no single occupation that it gets pinned down to. It's a network. It weaves its way through labor force supply and demand. It touches multiple points, and the idea behind this study was to try and see how that looks at a municipal level. There are a few gaps in the data. We have 5 pillars that are clustered around for doing this tourism study: food and beverage service, accommodation, recreation, and entertainment. We were able to get data for Lincoln. Transportation and travel services, the data wasn't there. So that shouldn't mean that we're saying those industries don't exist, simply that the very specific industry subsectors within them we're not able to get data for. And again, this is the problem of going from a methodology designed for a labor force of about 12 million down to a labor force of about 10,000 or so. So there's an economy of scale. We're losing a little bit on that end, but it provides us with a really good place to begin this examination and to begin framing a tourism methodology that fits within Lincoln's specific expectations and needs. And I'll get to that shortly. So what we're looking at here is roughly 995 jobs in Lincoln that, if tourism were to stop overnight, would be dramatically affected by that disappearance. So we can't say that all of those jobs are tourism jobs, but this methodology tells us that if tourism disappeared, these 995 jobs would be strongly at risk of disappearing as well, or being scaled back, or being automated. So this shows us where the strength is, but it also highlights the pressure points as well. So they break down between the top 3 sectors. There are food and beverage, recreation and entertainment, and the accommodation sector. And again, the zeros, don't mind them. It just means that the industry subsectors that tourism is attached to within this methodology isn't reported within our data set. Not that there's no economic activity in those sectors at all. And we can break things down a little bit and start looking at the specific industry subsectors that are existing within this framework. So food and beverage sector, very much dominated by restaurants, limited service eating places. Translating that from statistical English into plain English, you're looking at any restaurant, any food counter, any fast food place, they're all included in there. Drinking places gets a 0 because there really aren't a lot of bars that don't have food service happening as well, so they all get moved down into this limited service eating place idea. It's an old industry code. I expect Stats Canada will be getting rid of it sometime soon just because there's not a lot of activity there. Recreation and entertainment sector, again, we're looking at the other amusements and recreation industries, which really doesn't mean much in plain English, so I can translate that. And what we're looking at there is any sort of recreational activity that's not gambling. So marinas, beaches, bowling alleys, tennis courts, golf courses, any sort of activity where you're having people gather for recreational purposes, but there's no gaming involved. So that's what we're looking at there. Small number for performing arts, and a non-zero number for spectator sports. That's why it's less than 10. That's just Stats Canada likes to suppress data when you have less than 10 jobs anywhere. So we know there are some jobs in spectator sports, more than 0, less than 10 there. So not really a huge economic driver for tourism based on the data that we're seeing here. at least in terms of direct employment. Secondary employment, different story, but direct employment we're looking at. Accommodation, again, 136 in traveler accommodations. That's just statistical talk for hotels, motels, anywhere people pay to spend a night. Airbnbs and gig economy accommodations are not included in this. At present time, we don't really have a great way of measuring economic impact on that. It's something we're working on, but so are a lot of other people trying to fill that statistical gap there. So the next steps on all of this, we can take this data and the detailed report that we sent to Paul, that starts to look at the occupations that exist within each of these industry sectors. So what you saw here tonight, very high level, the report drills down and starts looking at things from an occupation point of view. So we're covering both sides of it, the industries at work and then the jobs people are doing within those industries, all of which are part of this tourism equation. So what we wanted to express tonight in terms of next steps is to just sort of do a quick list of the work that we've already done with the town of Lincoln. 3 census reports, quarterly job demand reports, an annual job demand report, and a tourism report. But that's really just scratching the surface of what our capacity is to support Lincoln in economic development activities. The methodologies that we've developed can all be folded together and we can start doing some really creative things. Quick example. We took, this is job demand in Lincoln that reflects the agriculture jobs that were most frequently hired in our data set that we presented on earlier. So sales and service occupations, natural resource, and occupations in manufacturing. This is Lincoln's job demand in 2017 as reflected by the data we gathered for the Niagara tourism study. So we're able to start slotting together bits and pieces of data based on these methodologies and based on the evidence we have available to us. This one, don't mind the 2017 count column heading. This is historic job demand for occupations that have been identified in the tourism methodology. So not every one of these jobs is going to be tourism related, but all of these jobs are affected and in some capacity support tourism. So if we lost tourism 100%, we'd expect to see losses in demand for these occupations. So this is just another way the data can get sliced. We can break this out year by year. We can look at specific occupations within specific industries. We don't often get to say this in the world of statistics, but really the sky's the limit for custom analysis on this work. If there's a question that needs answering, we're in a capacity to really start answering that. So that's sort of the last point I will close on, is just to say that we can produce data. The challenge right now is defining the unknowns and setting the scope of what we want that analysis to be, because the tools that we've had have never been richer in their scope, and the methodologies we have available to us have never been more comprehensive. So thank Council for their time and for listening to this presentation. That's all I have prepared, so I can take questions.
Thank you, Adam. You did very well. Solo.
Thank you.
Councillor Thompson.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, through you. Thank you very much. There were no incidents, so that's very positive.
Okay.
Just a couple questions in and around. I noticed ag tech wasn't sort of reported in there in any of the occupation groups. Just wondering if there's any. I got 3 or 4 questions, so maybe if you want to take that one first.
Okay, sure. Ag tech was not defined by Canada Tourism HR because this was a 2009 methodology. So if we refresh this and if we focused on ag tech, I have a few notes prepared on that, though no slides. So really, we've got capacity based upon work that was done in Guelph and work that's been done provincially a little bit more recently to start digging into that. What we're looking at just with the ag food side of it, before we start folding the tech in, we're looking at about 3,200 jobs in Lincoln in 2017. And that's about 32% of all the jobs that we could report. It's been at about a 14% growth rate since 2012. And we're generally looking at about 9 industries at a pretty deep level. So farms, full service restaurants, beverage manufacturing, farm product, merchant wholesaling, grocery stores, food merchants, metal product manufacturing, bakeries, specialty food stores. When we roll the tech side in, that's when we start adding the professional, scientific, and technical operations to it as well. And we can start leaning into the education side as well. no one municipality has presented any common way of measuring that side of it, though. Usually what we've been seeing in doing the review of the literature is every municipality wants to focus on their own unique assets that they have available and build that into the formula. So really for Lincoln, it would just be to take the existing building blocks that we recognize as strengths, pair those with where we want to grow, and folding those into those 9 sectors that I just mentioned.
Okay. I guess my concern, excuse me, would be sort of not knowing about certain things, certain sectors that might mysteriously be out there that nobody kind of knows about, the hidden gems. And you segued into actually another one of my questions was, why are we using a decade-old methodology? Is there nothing newer? There's obviously a need for an update. Is that something that we can go to our provincial and federal counterparts, representatives in our town, to request to assist us with this economic development piece? And are you able to assist us with doing that, I guess?
So the simple answer to your question, Councillor, is yes, there is nothing newer than this. Finding this methodology was the figurative hunt for Red October to find it. So developing something that's more current and reflects current industry mix within Lincoln and provincially and nationally is probably something that we would consider advisable, and it's absolutely something where we'd have the resources to contribute.
It's kind of shocking, actually, that there's nothing for 10 years.
Yeah.
And we're just expecting to have economic growth and know what's going on. Anyway, I noticed there was another thing that wasn't sort of captured. It's the RV parks. There was a sort of a zero factor in there. And I know, for example, we have 3 in Lincoln, plus marinas, which also have a transient sort of come and stay overnight or stay for the weekend or whatever kind of concept. And I'm just wondering why that wasn't captured, because that's almost a pure tourism focus.
That was one we had to drill into, and based upon what we were able to find on that front, the RV parks only end up getting job counts if we're looking at people that are hired as formal employees. So if I owned my own RV park and I was operating it as an independent person, or if I was hiring family to work for it or short-term contractors, the job numbers on that aren't going to show up in the tool that we have there. So we knew that those parks were there, and the fact that it was pulling a 0 didn't quite track. That's the limitation of that one data set that we were working with. There may be ways to compensate for that, but again, this was why we wanted to have the consultation with Paul to see which direction would we want to go on digging into that.
Okay, very good. Thank you very much. Certainly there's a lot of, as you said, a lot more questions coming out of it than there are answers. So great work, and thank you for bringing this to us. Really appreciate it.
Thank you, Councillor.
I believe it's Councillor Pachariva. Is that who we have next?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thanks, Adam, for the presentation. And my question, too, was along Councillor Thompson's line of the methodology. And you know, knowing, you know, taking a look at the RV and campgrounds, and you know, often, and that's a typical family business, is that, you know, it's family and that runs something like that. So the methodology discounting it because it's not a hire isn't a true capture of the economic benefit of those. So, you know, going forward, if you're able to change that to grasp it. Same thing, the travel services sector. I know that there's 3 companies within the town that provide that service. And then there's probably another 6 that feed in, that have, you know, that come in and out in some way, shape, or form. You know, probably making up about 2%. So again, like going forward and being able to adjust that methodology on a based in Lincoln solution going forward might give you, or might give us, a better look. And you know, like you said too, where I think it was Councillor Thompson, being able to go, and we've had this issue before when we're trying to do economic data. And I think you and Mario pointed out last time, you know, Grimsby's counted with Hamilton. Some of the categories don't add up to be easily translatable.
Yeah.
So, but I mean, you know, a good starting point. and a great place to kind of put our flag in the ground and see how important it is, and try to work with that methodology to be able to go then and say, you know what, you're understating this and you're understating that, and you know, we need some help here because these are the dollars it's generating. And we kind of saw that on our trip overseas. So thank you.
Thank you.
Excellent job.
Thank you.
Take tomorrow off.
I believe I will. Thank you.
Mayor Easton.
Thank you very much, Adam. We don't seem to have any trouble stepping into anybody's arena. We do appreciate you coming this evening. I'm curious to know, this is a report that I got from the region because the data that they provided was all based on the provincial classifications, which are, I'm growing weary of them because they don't fit anything. I'm sure everybody's tired of them. But I will say that this fleshing out that is happening each time, this is now, I think, the second year, not the third year that we've had data. There certainly is a lot more to think about. So I think that's very good news. So do you check against the regional data to see what the match is? Is it a good fit, do you think, or?
Yeah, Blake Landry and I, who's the manager of research and economic data, I can't quite remember Blake's title. Blake and I work very closely together. So it's a very open door relationship between Blake and I. If the data is coming from Stats Canada, it's generally considered to be unimpeachable, at least for our purposes. We certainly can't prove it wrong, so we're not going to take too much issue unless we get some local intelligence that says, you know, absolutely not. So there's a lot of collaboration on that front. There's a lot of shared knowledge and shared best practice. With respect to some of the agri-food research that we've been digging into and agri-tech research we've been digging into, Blake is my go-to in terms of measuring the GDP and other economic impact on that front, since this is territory where we want to make sure we have a consistent message across the board and that the region isn't operating with one set of data and municipalities are operating with another. So yeah, this is a collaboration on that front. With respect to specific reports, usually we're looping each other in at the draft stage. So Blake was on our advisory committee for the agriculture report, as was Kelly Provost as well. So they both were with us, saw the survey, approved the methodology, got first access to the results, and have folded the results of that into their recommendations to the region's agriculture subcommittee.
Well, one of my observations, and maybe you can clarify whether you know anything about this or not, is that the weighting, what I'm going to call the weighting within the regional report, from that, looking at GDP, we would have thought that the most important contributor was industry. Is that your understanding?
By industry, we mean manufacturing?
Manufacturing.
Okay. That sounds right, but not without having the report in front of me. I wouldn't want to contradict.
Right. Okay, because when you don't have very much detail on other categories, such as agriculture, and even now, you know, we can't really make those comparisons. I think we make an assumption that the GDP here lies with agriculture. And if that's the case, then of course we're right to be moving in the directions that we are. So maybe that's just something that you could make a note of, and I don't know whether there's some very easy way to look at those numbers, but I think that would be interesting. I realized tonight that we're really talking about agriculture, which is great. So I guess I'll keep harping on that just because I know that very soon that we're going to want to start making decisions about our future, and this data is extremely important. The other area that is really troublesome is the fact that there is no addendum, no collection of data around who's working on the farms. And I know that the numbers do not include offshore workers, and they certainly do not appear to include landed immigrants and potentially the numbers just aren't big enough. They don't look big enough to even include people who weren't born here but are Canadian citizens. So can you tell us anything about that? Why is it excluded? It is an important number for us.
Yeah, absolutely. So I don't want to run the risk of putting council to sleep by getting too far into Stats Canada methodologies, but I did work on this problem a little bit in anticipation of this meeting. So the labor force survey is very much, it's a telephone survey. They're calling, they're asking where you live, they're asking what your occupation is, and the reason why we don't see seasonal workers and migrant workers captured in that is quite often they're not getting direct access to Stats Canada. If they're on a cell phone, Stats Canada is typically not calling them. The onus is on the employer in that case to respond on behalf of the workforce. And that's where we can start getting into trouble with data representation. That's why NWPB tends to shy away from putting too much stock in the monthly labor force data. So when we see we've gone from 4,500 to 5,000 people working in agriculture, and the phone rings and it's very angry people saying, we haven't hired 500 people, where's this coming from? So there's vagaries in that sense on how the data is reported that can lead to, often Stats Canada will underreport rather than risk over-reporting. So that's where part of this comes from. The 2016 Census of Agriculture speaks to some people who are working in farms and gives us a sense of temporary and contract workers there. So within Lincoln, we are looking at 2,292 employees working on farms within a seasonal or temporary basis. Now, that doesn't presume that all of those people are migrant workers, and it doesn't presume that they're all working directly in agriculture. This is everyone engaged in any sort of farm work. So a contractor coming in to do HR and payroll is going to be included in this count. But at the very least, we can use this count as a proxy measure to set the upper limit for what we would expect the impact of migrant workers within agriculture to be. So based upon that, and the Census of Agriculture is extremely thorough because it's part of supply chain management and making sure that there's enough food so people don't starve to death. So it's very rigorous in engaging with every farm that there is in every municipality, gauging what they're producing, how much of it they're producing, acreage, number of cows, number of pigs, extremely, extremely fine detail work. So while we're still relatively new working with this data, and I don't want to, put undue stock in it, we haven't found any reason to question it yet. So I think it would be safe to assume that 2,292 number, that's the upper limit for what that migrant worker footprint looks like. It is almost certainly less than that. How much, we can still work on trying to piece that together, but certainly we can frame the upper limit of it, and we can frame the maximum impact of that workforce. Just not through the labor force survey, which is why it's difficult to find.
Right, okay, I understand. Well, I certainly, I know what's gone into this report and the effort that it took to collect the data, and it really is quite remarkable that it's as accurate as it is, because it needed a lot of effort to do that door-to-door work, for sure. Well, thank you very much. I'm sure we'll learn more as we go along.
Thank you, Mary Stone.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr.
Councillor
Chairman.
McMillan.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thanks, Adam, for being here. It's interesting information. One of the things that I was interested in, and I think, and the mayor was touching on this, is the relevance to the data of where the jobs are, and such things as whether they're short-term, whether they're long-term, whether they are student employment, whether they are seasonal employments, and offshore workers. And I think some of that you've already answered. So, but I just wanted to know, is there a relevance to your data or to this research to look at those kinds of categories?
Certainly, Councillor. It wasn't included with the tourism study or with the agriculture project, primarily because we're able to track that, and we're already providing that to the town of Lincoln in quarterly demand reports that we're processing. So we can capture full-time, part-time, sector of employment, skills required, compensation. That data can all be captured, and we're sharing that right now with the town on a quarterly basis, because that's how quickly we get that data through. It could be applied to this, though. So even though we didn't do it with the tourism study, again, that was very much replicate the methodology as it was presented to us, and then iterate on it and do something better with it. So it would be very easy for us to take that approach, tune it towards Lincoln, and then start capturing full-time versus part-time opportunities, seasonal versus permanent opportunities. That capacity is absolutely in play.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay, so thank you, Adam. And the one thing that caught me was on your hiring patterns and in some of the statistics that you put down the right-hand side of that slide, and you know, almost 60% found the hiring process either difficult or very difficult, and then 50% ranked the quality of the workers as low or very low. Any comments about that? I guess as it applies to agriculture, you know.
The anecdotes we received, Mr. Chair, generally relate to agriculture employers feeling frustrated with the fact that their sale price is fixed, but their cost of labor has been increasing.
Okay.
So this is not a direct line to minimum wage changes, but minimum wage was mentioned by a couple of the employers we spoke with. But generally, it's more to do with the fact that they can only sell, a kilogram of apples sells for what a kilogram of apples sells for. And if they're not able to increase that price, they can't increase the price that they're paying to their workforce, which means in a lot of cases they're stuck with the workforce they're able to attract for what they're able to offer. So there were some systemic issues identified beyond their control and really beyond the control at anything other than a provincial or federal level.
And your soft skills were more frequently cited as a hiring challenge, and it's not the first time I've heard this. I mean, it's not exclusive to agriculture. In the hiring process that we are in my day job, that comes out as well. That there just seems to be this inability for people to communicate effectively. So. Interesting that it's also here in the agricultural slide. So thank you very much. I certainly appreciate, as the Chair of Economic Development, all of what you and Mario do for our group, and the information that you provide us. And I think we'd all like it to be more granular and more. How many people do we have employed by wineries? But short of going out and knocking on doors, I don't know if we can get that kind of data. But you can?
Yes.
Okay. So yeah, thank you very much. I guess Paul has a comment on that.
Thank you, Chair. Through you to the committee, I just want to thank Mr. Durant for being here this evening. Further to your point about sort of some of the winery numbers, as you recall, in our interim report that we presented in our last Economic Development Committee, we did have some diagrams in there that did barrel down a little bit on some of the tourism and farm numbers that I could recirculate to the committee. But I just wanted to point out that obviously, agriculture and tourism is a big sector of our economy here. But in addition, we do have over 15, almost 1,600 jobs in the manufacturing sector as well. So we do want to obviously reference the fact that we are, a diversified economy here in the town of Lincoln. But both Mr. Durant and I are going to be sitting down. We haven't had a chance to schedule it yet, but we're going to be sitting down soon to barrel through and really barrel down and go through the detail of the actual tourism report. At which point we will be sharing it in its entirety to the committee. So thank you.
Very good. Thank you, Adam.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Council.
So our next presenters, Mr. John Hack and Mr. Al Kent from Sierra Planning and Management to present project update, Town of Lincoln Economic Development Strategy, Employment Lands Analysis, and Employment Lands in Rural Areas Community Improvement Plan. Gentlemen, thank you for coming, and when you're ready, Paul, do you have a comment to make?
I do. Thank you, Chair. Through you to the committee, and I just, as our presenters are getting the presentation loaded, and there it is. As the report that we'll be dealing with a little bit later this evening does highlight, our guests here this evening are from Sierra Planning and Management, who are here to provide an update on the three-part project that we are undertaking. Further, the report that we'll discuss later on Given the fact that we have changed one of the scopes on the CIP programs, we are pushing back a little bit in terms of the deliverables and are targeting for September for presentation of the final copies of the 3 projects. But in addition to that, Global Investment Attraction Group, who is working on the strategy itself, has provided both John and Al key points that they'll be mentioning this evening. So I'm sure there'll be some further questions later on.
Very good.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair. Good evening, everybody. We have quite a lot to get through, so I'm going to go through the first part relatively quickly. So this is a progress report. The intention is not to get down into the weeds, but that shouldn't dissuade you from providing any questioning to us that is spurred by anything that you see in what we're doing here, and we can attempt to answer that or certainly take it under consideration as we continue to move through the project. So it's a good opportunity for a discussion. There are 3 elements to this. Obviously, there's the economic development strategy and the action plan, the employment lands strategy itself, and then the community improvement plan process as well. So the rest of that slide is fairly self-explanatory. The general purpose was that these things are interrelated, and so we've done them under an umbrella approach. And our company, just to remind everyone, so Sierra is taking the lead on all 3 aspects. Our colleagues from Global Investment Attraction Group are taking the lead in substantive terms, and there's the research and the recommendations for the economic development strategy itself. Just to focus down on some of the objectives there. The main element, the last bullet point there, relates to the fact that we're trying to do this in parallel with the region's municipal comprehensive review, the MCR process, as you're well aware of. That's being used across the GTA as a basis for trying to integrate up and down through the tiers for a range of things, including employment lands, sustainability over the next quarter century or more. So we've talked about who we are, but just to break it down, so Alistair and I are undertaking the detail of the employment lands supply and demand analysis, and we have some directions to share with you on that this evening, as well as the community improvement plan, which has expanded in scope, and I think rightly so. So that we're very hopeful that will be quite a comprehensive program, and I'll speak to some of the expectations you might have around that as we go through it. And then the economic development strategy, which is, you heard a great presentation, and I'm not sure if he's still here, but it was his first presentation. It was a good one from my judgment in terms of the workforce. That's certainly one element of the economic development strategy, so there's some interplay there. A range of other things, but the employment lands, the supply. Do you have the infrastructure in place to actually put more industry in town? And can you incentivize to make that happen? That's the left-hand side of that slide. It feeds into the economic development strategy. Okay, consultation details. You've seen this slide before, not that we expect you to recall it, but in terms of the process that has been followed, there has been community consultation throughout the process. There has been external stakeholder consultation, particularly on the economic development strategy. There was really 3 struts to that. There was the heavy data lifting on profiling the competitive advantages of Lincoln within its regional and national context. Then there was the strategy making, which is currently underway and quite advanced. And then there is the whole host of interactions with local businesses, agents, others who are involved as relevant players and contribute to economic development. So that's been a big piece of it. And then the internal stakeholder consultation, and we've been ably supported both by Paul and Matt Bruder of the Planning Department in our work, but then we did have some internal consultation previously in February to try and make this plan, at the end of the day, the economic development plan has to speak to the role of the municipality as broadly as possible. So all of the things that you're doing, whether it be in tourism or parks and rec or community hub development or, transit and transportation planning, all of that has to lace into the final solution. So that consultation was important. It gave us a good window, and it will carry through to the recommendations that we have. Okay, in terms of the work plans, I'm not going to go through in too much detail again. There's a lot of detail in here, but it started with background research and review for all three projects. It's an important part of the undertaking to get into as much detail as possible, but try and sieve out and create an understanding of the framework. What makes Lincoln tick? Why does this this community, this economy succeed? What are the realities of the regional circumstance it finds itself in, so on and so forth. Consultation and stakeholder engagement I've just mentioned, but that ran through February and March, and actually went further probably into May in terms of the interviews that were being held. And then from this point on, it's really a case of strategy development, with the exception of the CIP, because we've expanded the brief for the CIP. It was originally employment lands, and I can give you at the appropriate time here a brief on what employment land CIPs look like. It was expanded into including CIP provisions, so incentive program opportunities for the agricultural area, which I think fits in quite well with the aims of the economic development strategy that's forthcoming. So because of that, the overall reporting, we want all three programs, all three strategies, I should say, in your hands in September. We recognize that there's an important date coming up in October that's important as well, but I think we can still get that information there in terms of decision making from it. Obviously, Paul and colleagues will make recommendations to you in terms of how you deal with that information, whether to receive their information or whether you're otherwise able to make any decisions from it. The CIP, really, I've covered this slide in detail, but the stakeholder engagement is ongoing. That's important because the purpose of a CIP is not to create a boilerplate of programs that you wonder how do you make them work. We've done about probably 12 or 15 community improvement plans in various parts of Ontario, and the approach that we've always taken is that if you wanted to, you could develop a CIP relatively quickly. In terms of it being a document that you could then put to the public and off you go. The challenge is making sure it actually is going to be useful to those that have particular needs in this community, and some of them are things that you can't. We'll get into it when we look at the results of the questions, but we can't answer every question through a CIP, but there are things we can. So it's making it fit hand in glove with the particular needs of the local situation. So that's the essence of the CIP. And then just to signal going forward, you need to have the sufficient resources to market it and make it work. And if you don't, then it's a lifeless document. If you do, it can be very, very beneficial. Okay, in terms of the project updates, so in terms of the economic development strategy and action plan, although our colleagues from GEAG were unavailable this evening, they are working, they have been following a very linear process. They're now in the strategy making process. And so the phase 1 is complete, phase 2 is completed, that was the consultation. They're now into phase 3. Phase 3 has involved the development of goals and objectives. And just so to give you a little lens on how what can be they can be very big and heavy documents, and that's probably a conversation piece around this table and with Paul, is how do you get that out in a readable format? So I think we're aware of that, but you establish the goals, the objectives, and then under the objectives there's going to be a series of action items. So that's the shopping list of things that you wish to do over the next 3, 4, 5 years, and the prioritization of it. And obviously there are resource implications, so whether it is something that has to be budgeted or could be suitable for grant funding, et cetera, or whether partners can be involved. You obviously just had an important partner on the workforce side of things in the room, so how those services can be brought together. So that's important, and so that is really the essence of the process of the economic development plan. And just to re-emphasize, these plans are very good when they're short in duration, specific, quite surgical, and so the idea of it being a 5-year plan is important. It's not like a rec master plan where you're looking 10, 15 years out, or a culture plan. This is about, making some specific recommendations. In terms of the strategy, the results today, and I'm getting to that age where I need reading glasses, so I have to. It's too small on the screen. There are six essential roles that the economic development strategy is going to be involved in. The one thing that is sort of often cited in many places is the goal for inward investment. And there's nothing wrong with that. You need inward investment, so that's one of them, so attracting new investment, but also recognizing the role of inward investment. So, in that, you'd call that, organic economic development. So that's the business retention and expansion possibilities, working with what you have. Talent and workforce development and adaptation, so the whole workforce element. Marketing of investment to visitors and to prospective talent, and also providing the services that talent needs. We've mentioned that before, and I was struck as well by the last presentation about quality of personnel that you can hire, and there are lots of reasons for that, and it can be anything from time of year to they don't perceive there being good viable opportunities for housing and things like that. So this whole idea that there's an integration of thinking, and the municipality is the best proponent to try and pursue that integrated thinking is something that comes out of these things. And then some of the other roles, innovation and entrepreneurship is something that obviously is a mainstay in many economic development plans, and then cultural, creating an open for business climate to the extent that it's needed over and above what you are currently doing. That's a cultural lens that will have resourcing implications potentially as well. This slide, I think you'll find is fairly interesting given the conversation that was had just on the last presentation. But where Lincoln's leadership is obviously most apparent is in agricultural, and so the idea that Lincoln is a center of excellence for agriculture is quite important. I'll just turn your attention to the second row there, or third row down from the top on the first tab. Gross farm receipts, over $250 million in terms of receipts based on the Census of Agriculture. 13% of the Golden Horseshoe total as a whole. And so on a number of different metrics, the municipality either is number one or is number two, and you can see in terms of the scale of diversity in terms of crop types and so forth, it's evident there as well. So it's number one or number two in the region for many of the farm-based production types, as we've identified. Okay, this one you may have some difficulty in reading the detail in the middle, so we apologize. But what we're really focusing there on is that, you know, the emerging element, this plan is not going to speak only to agriculture, and that's an important point to get across. But in terms of just focusing on where there is potential here as a center for excellence, you know, we will be capitalizing on the agricultural base and the relationships. So there's obviously one of the themes you'll see, and I'm going to run through some very briefly. They're not on the slides, but just some very brief indication of the kinds of goals that are being set. Agricultural production, obviously, in its range of forms, has the opportunity to generate, you know, improvements in technology and productivity, which is a value-added component. And to the extent that you can create a more local capture of that value added, that's the vertical integration that can help propel economic development in the community. So the value-added piece, and of course, once you've got value-added, you tend to have diversification and a range of things, and then you can create tourism opportunities and learning opportunities from that as well. Just to focus, as I said before, employment lands and other commercial opportunities and the industrial side of things are on the agenda for the plan, and so please don't read these slides as an indication that there's an over focus on one sector. Just before I hand over to Al, I just want to give you an indication of some of the goals and objectives. So under, you know, the idea of, firstly, some of the basics. So competitive location, and that's what you strive for in any of these plans. And the objective is to attract, encourage, and promote new development. So how do you do it? Well, it is about land supply, and we're going to talk about this right now. It is about incentivizing almost every municipality in the GTA, you know, is looking at community improvement plans, and they are getting very precise. You know, there's a community improvement plan for seniors housing, and then for a hotel. And as soon as the hotel gets built, they know they only have a market for one hotel, but as soon as that hotel gets built, they close the CIP down. So it really is part of the toolbox of economic development. So that's one thing. The whole conversation about DCs and tax rates, I hate it because there's not too much you can do about it, especially when there's a regional picture as well. But those are the sorts of things that are relevant. And then obviously all the other quality of life aspects are important. Investment readiness, there's a communications piece to all of this, focusing on existing businesses and business growth is important. Skills alignment, not only with your existing businesses, but those which you are attempting to attract. And then, you know, improving the agricultural sector, as I've mentioned, in terms of value-added development. So that's just some of these things that the economic development strategy will get into, and we do apologize for our colleagues not being here to give you a bit more flavor to it, but the draft report will have all of this in some detail. So with that, I'm going to hand over to Al, and
thanks, John.
You can just go from there.
Yeah, so this is a slide which you have seen before. We've just updated it slightly in terms of process. So just as a recap, the purpose of the employment land supply and demand analysis is to establish the amount, location and type of employment lands there are in the town, and whether or not those will meet the forecast growth demand over the next 25 years as set by the growth plan and by the region to 2041. And the definition of employment land has been agreed with staff, and it's split into is land is designated in the official plan with zoning for manufacturing, warehousing, offices, and also ancillary uses, which can include retail, but only if it's not major retail. And the focus of the search is on the town's defined urban areas, and that's principally because outside the urban areas, you've got a lot of green belt, so it's restricted. So in terms of looking at our initial observations on supply, first looking at industrial uses, the most noteworthy observation we've reached so far is the impact which the Beansville GO Station Secretary Plan area proposals have had on vacant supply of industrial land in land use policy terms. So the change we've illustrated on the two plans you see on your screen, Plan 1 on the left shows in purple the area which is designated for industrial uses in the official plan. And Plan 2 on the right shows the land use proposals identified in the secondary plan for the GO station, with the area to the west of Ontario Street changing from industrial, as I say, which is in purple, to blue, which is office commercial, where importantly, and this is an important point, the industrial uses are now no longer permissible. So the result of all of that in industrial terms is that the majority of the town's vacant industrial land is now on the eastern side of the Beamsfield Business Park and not in the secondary plan area. And the majority of those opportunities in the eastern part of the Beamsville Business Park are infill opportunities, broadly between 0.3 hectares, 3 hectares. So there is a bit of a mix, but it's all infill. So we've also identified a small amount of land adjacent to the boundary with Grimsby. That's in the Durham industrial area, but that is restricted as well to dry industrial. So it's got an agricultural zoning, but there is an opportunity to do industrial, but it's very restricted. So our initial finding is that the total vacant industrial land supply is unlikely to amount to any more than, we imagine, probably about 15 hectares. So just looking at other uses in terms of the definition. So as we've said, the area around the proposed GO station is now the principal area for office-led development, together with part of Prudhome's and the development site there. That includes the larger parcels of land which front the QEW, which are capable in principle of severance into smaller parcels. Since issuing the presentation pack to you, we've looked a bit more closely at the vacant supply of land in those two locations, and we estimate provisionally at this stage that there's somewhere in the region of 20 to 25 hectares in total across that land area which permits offices or office-led development. However, we're in the process of remeasuring, so that figure might change, but that's our preliminary estimate. We've also confirmed through our research there are vacant small infill sites scattered around the principal roads in the central business districts in Beamsville and in Vineland. In policy terms, zoning allows for these to be offices, but that's one of a variety of commercial uses which includes retail. Our view is that the site characteristics and their location are such that it's unlikely that any of those infill sites, albeit very small, but they are infill sites, will be brought forward solely for office development, with a more realistic assumption being that any offices delivered would probably at best be in a mixed-use scheme alongside retail. I mean, it's in all of those locations, it's an obvious retail location, so I don't think we can say that there is any contribution towards the employment land supply through those small infill sites. And also, just another point, that we've also haven't identified any employment land in Jordan Station or Tintern. And there is some land in Camden, but that's less than a hectare, and that's zoned for general commercial uses. So again, that would only, within the context of employment land, only allow for offices, which, you question whether or not Camden would be an office location. I doubt it, but it's in the inventory at the moment anyway. We're also reviewing with public works staff servicing and deliverability of all the sites in the inventory. Our initial desk-based research indicates that the majority of the vacant land isn't shovel ready. So that's to say you're going to have to require some preparatory work at the very least, including servicing, before you can actually get those away. There is probably a direct connection to existing municipal servicing within the existing business park. There's servicing running along, you won't be surprised to know, along the middle of the roads, which you could tap into. But that's only really for the infill parcels which go along Union Road, and some of them which go along Bartlett Road, just next door. And one very important point, again, which you probably won't be surprised to know given it's a cleared site, Public Works confirmed to us that the servicing upgrades will be required prior to any development at Prudhoe. So obviously that needs to be front loaded before anything can happen there. So in terms of our next steps, we're in the process of doing the supply and demand reconciliation, the results of which will be in the final reporting in September. And that will identify the extent of any deficit in vacant land supply for industrial and or office uses to 2041. And that includes an allowance for frictional vacancy and long-term vacancy. The final report will also not just look at the amount of land, but also the quality. It might be, hypothetically, that you say you might have enough land for offices as a quantum, but you have to then look at the size of the sites, the quality of servicing. It's all very well if you say you've got the sites, but if you can't get them away and it doesn't meet demand, then that's another issue in itself. So that's something we'll be looking at. And the other facet to the reporting is we'll be looking at municipal-led sort of policy responses to encourage development of the existing vacant lands we've identified, or perhaps to increase or rebalance the supply between offices and industrial if that's required. For example, if we say that industrial land there is a deficit, which I suspect is probably quite likely, we'll look at things in terms of amending the zoning bylaw. Could, for example, the general commercial bylaw, which currently allows for offices and other services and retail, could you provide flexibility to include some industrial along King Street if it's in amenity terms acceptable? That might give you a bit more industrial land. We'll also look and ask the question about an extension to the urban boundaries. However, it's our understanding that you will require an official plan review and a Greenbelt review for that to happen, and I think that's some time off, so that's more of a medium to long-term focus, we would have thought. And as John's referred to, in terms of the CIP, we'll look at financial incentive programs. What can we do to encourage the existing supply that you do have to be developed on or expanded? And we'll also look at marketing strategies. So there's synergies with the economic development strategy and action plan, which our colleagues at GIAG are preparing. Albeit that's for a 5-year period, but we can look at marketing more widely and see whether or not you can make the best of the now newly zoned office location that you have around the GO Transit station as proposed, and also to try and make best use of the manufacturing land that you have.
Thanks, Al. Thanks, Al. As you can see, there are some messages coming out of the employment lands strategy here. And there is and underline the strategy. This really isn't about a numbers exercise, although it will look and feel just like that when you read it. But if you've seen the supply analysis that's been done already, the demand can always be generally estimated, and you can produce ranges. But it's the supply issues that are the most. It's about choices, having the right sites, and continuing to have the right sites. So continuing to be able to make. Offer the market enough good sites. So there's an immediate tie-in to the community improvement planning aspect to this. How quickly do you want to see those newly designated lands built? That's a direct link to the conversation that this chamber will have to have about the scale of investment and resources that goes along to a community improvement plan. So on the employment lands and rural CIP, the purpose there, just to remind everybody, is that it's to offer municipal financial incentives, under provisions of probably a number of, there are several ways to do it, but obviously the lead one is Section 28 of the Planning Act that allows you to bonus properties that you otherwise would not be able to. You've already got 3 CIPs up and running. This will look and feel like a different community improvement plan because it will have different objectives. It's not going to be, we haven't got into the details of exactly the programs, but it's not going to be the small facade improvement type things. These are going to be different. Employment lands are, as you said, zoned for manufacturing, warehousing, office, and ancillary uses. The aim there is to get development, and typically what we've seen in other parts of the province is that these plans will have fewer applications and the ask will be bigger. And so the question is whether you use a mix of foregone revenue in terms of taxation that you can give back to them, or whether you're going to need to build a reserve and actually fund some of these programs through an upfront funding of the applicant, such as through development charge grants, things of that nature, or push it to the back end. And then on the rural areas, it's different again. The real aim there is that the agricultural asset that you have, you can't, you won't ignore it in a plan. It's front and center. It ties into the tourism opportunities. It ties into the value added. What are the various ways that a plan can still meet the test of good planning? So you're not allowing anything to happen on, priming agricultural land, but you're allowing for diversification, for more tourism, for the possibility for eateries, seasonal opportunities, all these things that will drive that rural economy. The CIP can assist with that. Quickly, we did, as part of the consultation that we had earlier in the spring, look at CIP questions via a survey. 41 respondents is actually, it would be quite low if it were some other things, but CIPs are quite esoteric things to survey people about. So 41 respondents is pretty good, actually. 90% land property owners, 10% developers, so that's exactly who we wish to speak to on some of these programs. And most of the businesses are small, between 1 and 10 full-time employees. Some of the questions there: in which part of Lincoln do you own or are interested in developing? So let's just read that as which part of Lincoln are you a property owner? Obviously, the majority in Beamsville, but you'll see, Vineland and Jordan. Interestingly, Jordan has no available employment land, but there's 21% there that we'll drill down on further in terms of what they were seeing in terms of needs. In your experience, or from what you've heard or seen, what constraints are preventing you from improving, expanding developing new employment lands in Lincoln? So we take that as an in good faith exercise in asking the question and then giving us back the answers. So, whether there are particular solutions which these particular property owners have not sought, let's not get into that. Let's just take it at face value. Municipal planning and development fees are seen as too high, but so too are utility costs. There aren't really any CIPs that deal with the utility cost issue. You have to have your partner at the utility work out programs and incentives of their own. It does happen. I know Chatham-Kent is one that's trying. So on and so forth. So there are, and the other one is building code compliance. So there are a few things that are municipal in terms of the control. Things like property taxation and things like that. That's obviously, it's less easy for you to simply deal with that. Obviously, there are other constraints. In the interest of time, I'm going to just move past that. In terms of what people wish to see in terms of programs that they might take advantage of, what I found interesting was that very, very few people said they'd take advantage of a tax increment grant, which without doubt gives you the most money back in your pocket if you are in the business of developing or expanding and increasing assessment. But getting planning fees and building permits back, well, obviously that can help, but that's going to be a smaller outlay. But they're there to give you a range. So that's the kind of thing that we're drilling down on. The other one of interest, though, is the grant program there. You see the first priority of people was that they were quite impressed with the idea of a building improvement grant that you could provide to them. So with that, I'll give it back to you, Mr. Chair, and we'd be more than happy to take questions.
Thank you. Thank you for the presentation. So we'll start with Councillor Foster.
Thank you. Good presentation. Community improvement plans are always kind of an interesting focus into the community, I guess, if you want to put it that way. When we originally came up with the initial one for downtown Beamsville, it certainly was a definite need. Like the downtown really required some help. And in fact, our downtown of Beamsville still requires help, but we have the tools in place to go and do it now. Part of your discussion is the fact that we don't have a lot of industrial space left. I mean, that's pretty obvious, and it's something we've known for a long time. Our whole taxation base is completely out of whack. We're 74% or something like that residential, and it's not going to improve. I mean, it's pretty obvious because just Greenbelt and everything else are causing it, or causing us grief with that. Given what you guys have looked at, and you know, and as we as a council in the future are going to have to start looking at this, or the future councils will, is there a bang for the buck that you're starting to see, or what's coming through with this? Like, for example, my own opinion, for what it's worth, is that I think, you know, providing a CIP for the rural areas to go and help develop and push forward tourism and the variety of agri-related items is probably the way that we can go best. What we're looking at for industrial and commercial, for instance, like some of these things are going to happen. That when GO Transit comes into the community, it's going to happen. The complaints about, the 49% complaints about you know, dev charges and everything else, that's just nonsensical. It's like they're going to come because the people are going to be there. So how are you guys finding this? Like, because you're the ones that have been doing the analysis for us at this point.
Yes, so in terms of, it's a very good question. So I would agree, firstly, the agricultural elements of the community improvement plan, that's just good management. I think you should be out there. It's a way to diversify. You can help. I mean, it's things as simple as the agricultural barn that the owner thought that they could have people sit down and eat apple pie at, you know, but they can't because it's changed from a farm occupancy to one where there's a higher test in the building code. And so there are ways and means that, you know, the building code can't reduce the cost difficultly, substantially, I should say, but it can help. So that's just one example. So there's a whole conversation about continuing to assist with agricultural diversification. That's just a good thing to do from an economic development perspective. On the industrial CIP, employment land CIP, you've hit the nail on the head. This is a choice that the future council is going to have to, because when we come back with the numbers that it might be in terms of what you would have to do, I think there's going to be some clear choices, and I think our job is to help you make those choices. So I don't want to suggest that we just push it back to you, but you are right. If you've redesignated and you've got you know, major office development and you have a piece of infrastructure coming in, you could very simply say, well, that's classic planning gain, that's betterment. You know, that landowner is going to get the benefit of that infrastructure and those people there. And so, you know, if you were in Toronto on the Shepherd Line 20 years ago, you'd pay a higher development charge because everyone knows you were going to get the uptick in value. So you're right, but then it's a case of the timing. When is that going to come? It may mean if you were to go to places like Vaughan, for example, and Guelph and others, they've taken the view that this is about competition. The office can go here rather than in another municipality, so they're prepared to do something, whether that's a DC deferral or actual grant back equivalent to a DC. You couldn't make that decision now. You'd have to see the pros and cons, and that's part of our pro forma work that we'll be doing to show that. But it is a question. I think it will come down also to whether or not, in some other municipalities, it comes down to whether or not a major expansion. There's one going on now in Scugog, if you read the papers, and it's doubling the size of a major manufacturing plant. They want to see their DCs, both locally and regionally, reduced substantially. And so there is work on a CAP, and that you could argue that's being very Machiavellian, but that's what is being done.
So if I may, Mr. Chair, the interesting thing about a good quality CIP as it goes on is the tool suite that's provided out of it, and of course I'm looking forward to seeing, you know, all the various recommendations, and of course, as you're going to say, you're going to be costing some of these things so that we can say, gee, you guys, do you really want to go down that road or not? But the one nice thing is that if the tool suite is there, then at least in the future, should councils decide that that's something that they really want to do, if you know, things go sideways, if there's never another commercial development ever goes down Ontario Street, you know, at least the tool is there that a future council can go and say, hey, we've done the public process, and it's there for us to make use of. So I'm looking forward to seeing even the recommendations from that, even though as a council, they may or may not implement it in the future, at least not for a while. So
Yeah, absolutely.
thank you.
Councillor Thompson.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. So what I gathered, I appreciate you guys coming in and putting all this information in front of us. Certainly there was a copious amount. So we're really lacking in our infrastructure in some of our industrial and commercial areas. Now, is there anybody else that is out there that is doing the build it and they will come kind of concept with regards to pre-development infrastructure being built? Are there programs that are available federally or provincially that would assist in that you know of? I don't know, it just kind of struck me as, you know, we know that they're going to develop there eventually. Would it, you know, enhance the opportunity for us to develop those pieces and get them sort of taken care of, so to speak?
Well, I can't cite any examples where it has happened, but just as a general point of principle, I think the focus has always been, for the last sort of 10 years or so, on the eastern part of the Niagara region in the Gateway area, and that's where the investment has been in offices and in industrial. And if it was going to be anywhere, that's where people are looking to locate at the moment. So it's when that drip effect is going to come back towards Lincoln. But I can't cite any examples at the moment in terms of where that's happened, but we can certainly look into that.
Just to, and one thing we haven't got into is that there is obviously there's a regional CIP, as you know, right? Where it's a prescribed municipality, you can do a regional CIP. And we're obviously going to tie that in terms of making the case for matching funding. But it can be quite lucrative. So, you know, in that plan area versus here. So Al's absolutely right. It's, you know, that's another reason why you might do the CIP. In terms of these, I think I'm correct. It's just the servicing is the issue down there.
Yeah, I think that's principally it, really. And I think when people drive past the majority of those sites, they see them being vacant for a while. And, you know, having looked at the supply myself, you do question and say, well, why are they vacant? Why have they been vacant so long? Is there some reason I shouldn't be investing in this land? And, you know, anecdotally, we've been told by a few agents that, you know, there are the two large tranches of land immediately to the north of the QEW. And actually, is access into those sites easy? Is the land actually too close to the QEW? Can you actually build on all of it? So it's all those sorts of questions. And I think if you're a local developer and you drive along the QEW, you might just go, yeah, I don't know. So it's one of those things where you look at marketing, you look at servicing, you look at all of those things to see if you can build the picture together and really sort of try and push it forward and try and get them released, whether it be for industrial or for office-led development.
Just to give you one, I don't want to take too much time, but just that question, which I think is sort of related about how much do you help and when, and do you see development? You know, Richmond Hill is a great example in that they're waiting for that subway line to come up, and they took the view. And Yonge Street is, you know, has its challenges up through Richmond Hill. They said we're not going to incentivize further south on Yonge Street, close to where the subway is, because eventually it will come, and the infrastructure will be the biggest incentive of all. So you have to. There's going to be a balancing act that we have to perform.
one more, if I might.
Yes.
And I guess I'm kind of curious. I'm really pleased to see that this is not the standard cookie cutter CIP presentation. So, thank you. I'm just wondering, is there anybody else? And I mean, I don't want to limit it to Ontario or Canada specifically, but doing agricultural CIPs, and are there some out there that we can draw upon some successes, and obviously maybe not some very successful projects that we can steer away from the pitfalls of those?
Yeah, I mean, I hadn't thought of that, but I don't see we can have a quick search through the rest of the continent just to see if there's any interesting agricultural community, success stories. Yeah,
we can look at performance, but in terms of the incentives and other things that we're looking at, I think Springwater has a good agriculture CIP, Haldimand County, and
we did that one. Yeah,
there you go. And Prince Edward County as well. So, thought I'd drop that one in. But Prince Edward County as well is another good, and that's actually a really good one to look at just in terms of branding. You look at it and it's impressive. It really gets the message across in terms of agricultural diversification. So, it's how you frame it, I guess, as well.
Yeah, I mean, we're always claiming to want to forward a made in Lincoln solution. So, distinctively different is not a negative by any means, and the norm is not always where you want to be either. So, thank you very much. I really appreciate all the information, and looking forward to more. Thank you.
Mayor Easton, do you have a question or questions?
Thank you very much. This is getting very interesting now. It's quite exciting. Thank you very much for the detail that you've brought us. I have a couple of questions. One has to do with incentives for around the creation of more employment lands by moving heavy industry to other areas in the town. Will there be anything in the CIP or is it another tool? And is there a cost-benefit analysis that would be done to do that?
If I could just, through you, Mr. Chair, just clarify the intent of your question. Are you talking about the opportunity to assist in the relocation of a business from one site to another in town?
Yeah.
Yeah, we haven't, and we're just getting into that level of detail, but again, from experience elsewhere, certainly the CIP should be written that if you're reinvesting in town, so leave aside the compatibility of land uses and whether that site they're vacating could be used for something else. If they're reinvesting in town, the same square footage but somewhere else, that should be treated as if they're building new and adding, because they are putting new capital dollars and obviously they're going to sustain their business going forward. So that's the first thing. As to how you can assist them, if you're talking about relocation, if they are intending to relocate, then I think there are ways that you can use these programs, tax increment grants, for example, get matching regional assistance if there is a brownfield element to their existing site. That can be parlayed into this as well. But if there is as you have, say, on the Toronto waterfront, and I'm thinking of Redpath Sugars, for example, where they're getting boxed in by all the residential and they know they're going to have to leave. If it's a proactive move to try and get them to relocate, I think it will become more challenging for a CIP to be effective. But if there is an intent to move, I think you can certainly draw on the programs here.
And could you tell us how you classified quarries in this?
Quarries?
Quarries.
Quarries would broadly fall into the agricultural zone. And I believe it's within the agricultural area and forms part of agricultural zoning. So it hasn't formed a focus of for example, our employment land analysis, albeit we do have jobs at quarries, but it hasn't formed part of our analysis.
Okay, so any activities that are going on in the quarries that are in addition to the extraction crushing, for example. Do you classify those as agriculture?
Well, we have for the land supply demand analysis. We've kind of said, it's in the urban area. I know there's couple of sites outside of the urban area, but that's essentially it. So the quarries being outside of the urban area would not be part of what we're doing. So they are in an industrial extractive use, but I'm pretty sure the zoning would be
It is
agricultural. So therefore, from our kind of mathematical lens and trying to just sort of get a handle on supply demand, it's excluded from what we're looking at. So you raise a question. We'll have to go back and consider.
And also just to add on for what John's saying, the definition which we're working towards for the employment land supply analysis work tallies up with what the region and the province are using to define employment land. And broadly speaking, when it talks about industrial and manufacturing uses, it's referring to the urban areas and growth within those areas more than anywhere else.
Okay, so Mr. Chairman, through you, I might understand then if you do an agricultural CIP, given the recent impact definitions and the big study that was done on the quarries, would they be included in the agricultural CIP?
And I don't mean this lightly, but it depends on whether or not you wish to help the extractive industrial sector, whether you think they have an issue that needs to be helped, whether or not they're going to generate. Because as we know, I've been involved in up in Caledon years ago on the quarry and pits question there is it can divide people, so I don't know the optics of it. But if there is, for example, if there is a use that requires assistance to create ongoing employment, which obviously has a direct benefit to supplying materials locally, absolutely it falls under the guise of the agricultural CIP. So we'll take down the question and we'll make sure we follow it through in our research.
Right, Mr. Chairman, I wouldn't mind talking with you more about that because it seems that we're looking at about a 4-year possible, I would say 4 years is probably a good number, before they're going to need to expand. And so we're looking at the numbers with the quarry in terms of their contribution to employment and GDP for the town. I think it's probably fairly substantial.
Yeah, no, it'll be, we'll actually go back and look at that. That would be interesting.
Mr. Chairman, I have another question, maybe a little bit out there, but maybe it's something that you can think about. When I was looking at the numbers in the regional statistics around gross farm receipts and net revenues, I'm wondering, is there a relationship between numbers of that ilk and tools that could be included in the CIP, maybe tools that we don't concern ourselves with now, that we would look at as beneficial to increase gross farm receipts and obviously net revenues. Is that part of it?
Yeah, I think it's, thank you for the question through you, Mr. Chair. I think absolutely. I think you can see there that our colleagues have listed out from the Census of Agriculture. I think our job is to ask the question in consultation with people, what are you trying to do? What is it you need? I am leery of those requests for, well, can you solve our irrigation issues? And I know that's a big challenge and it's a multi-jurisdictional challenge. Can you run this pipe? You can spend $1 million very quickly on this. So the CIP has to be articulated clearly as being small change in comparison to those kinds of things. But yes, if there is a particular focus where we can improve farm receipts and we can clearly see there's an opportunity to grow, it might be in things related to the innovation around products and what they need on their site to be able to do that, new buildings.
Oh, yeah.
CIPs tend to be related to the property aspects. It's a little difficult to run a CIP for a chattel or a piece of equipment. I'm not saying it hasn't happened, but we have to kind of just be careful that the ministry is always watching how these plans are being used. But the short answer is yes, where there's an opportunity to try and develop a sector within the agricultural umbrella. I think the CIP is a good opportunity to at least have language in there. And when you come to evaluate applications, if they tick that box, then I think, we can
Well,
try
I
the
would
system.
say, Mr. Chairman, that this chart, and I definitely agree with Councillor Foster. I mean, of course, people are going to say they're too high. I mean, but if there is a mechanism and if there are new tools available, new thinking, where we could begin to show people where the opportunities are of that investment, then if you would give that some consideration, it would be, I would certainly like to know more about that.
Okay.
It makes the tool more tailor-made, I think, for our circumstances here.
Yes, and that is, through you, Mr. Chair, that is the goal here, is to tailor it to the particular needs of the town.
Great, thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Councillor Patriva.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. Couple questions. Thanks for the presentation, very enlightening. Kind of going along the mayor's take with the relocation. So presently, I mean, if you're an industrial operation and you expand your footprint 50%, you're not charged development charges.
Right.
So would there be, and knowing too that there was industrial areas that used to be on the periphery that are now bumping up against the residential. So anywhere in this or thoughts to incentivize that to the relocation and the moving without the development charge. So, complete rebuild and we waive that. And then another question is on the industrial uses. So you're looking at vacant land supply. Any taking into effect, and I don't know if they're called brownfield, but areas that have vacant buildings or, once upon a time industrial uses that are derelict. Like, is that in the inventory or is that a different category?
Take the second question first.
You do the same.
Okay. So what I actually probably didn't make clear in the presentation is that we've also, within the supply, albeit there's not much of it, we've looked at underutilised land as well. Good example being next to the concrete works on the corner of Bartlett Road and King. And there's a small bit of land in between the factory to the north, which is technically not vacant because it's under the ownership of the manufacturing firm to the north of it, but we've included that in the supply. And there's a couple of other cases as well where we've looked at a site we've driven by and it's quite clear that it's got, for example, over 50% of the site is vacant and, brownfield, and therefore it could, in theory, have severance and be marketed separately. So we have included those, but there's not much of it.
Okay.
And on the first question, the approach here is that you want to be able to use the CIP effectively. So take the example where they're only expanding 50%, there's no DC, but they're relocating as well. They want to. Yeah, you would if it met the public test, good planning, it freed up a site, if it cleaned up a site. There's every reason why you might support it, but it's a big undertaking, but it's their undertaking. So it's their, everyone needs to be clear, it's their risk of moving. You would just be in for, obviously, there's no DCs to give them, so you would have to give them tax increment grant.
Okay.
And you would have to ask the region to match based on that, if it can.
Okay.
And so on and so forth. So there is a municipal fiscal question in there somewhere that you would ask at the right time for the particular applicant. But the good thing about these CIPs is that they are kind of self-insured, and that firstly they are discretionary, so you will have quite simple evaluation criteria. If it looks like a good project, if there's community support, if you're sure that the party involved is going to come through, you can support them, but you do so in principle. When the building gets built and when the taxes are generated, then you can start to grant them back.
Okay.
And if you have a bigger project, there are even some banks that will front end the tax increment grant, so they lend to the applicant on the basis that then when that tax increment grant comes through, it gets fed back to the banks.
Okay. Okay, and another question, if I may, Mr. Chairman. With respect to servicing, and you see traveling along, fully serviced industrial park, set up shop here. Any thought to, and if this will come out, like the municipality looking at servicing, but more on a selfish part, to loop dead-end infrastructure? So there's a water main here and there's a water main here. Now, if you fully service that area, you'd create higher value land, but you'd also solve your own problem. So you're incentivizing yourself, actually, to do that work to make it more attractive. Any?
I'm going to ask Al to jump in because he's been on the servicing file on this and it's still ongoing. But just from other municipalities, that's always the question, you know, and very often very little happens until you create the lotting fabric and you do the servicing and you say, yeah, we're open for business, come on in. So there is a benefit to that, without doubt. It's difficult though, isn't it? I mean, and it can be very expensive.
And
but
Councillor Thompson's question, right?
Yeah. There are places, I mean, just Clarington's another example where, you know, they are not able to get as much development because they can't convince the region to put the regional services in for them to market it. So it's going to be that incremental approach to development. But Al, you were doing the servicing.
Well, quite a simple answer in that we're working with the Public Works team at the moment, and we're also cognizant that there's the development charges background study, which contains a lot of detail about projections on servicing. So we're actually in the process at the moment of reviewing it, but that will be in the final report as well.
Okay, I'm going to go to Mr. Deaney, and then I'm going to go to Mr. Kirkopoulos.
Thank you, Chair. Through you to the committee, I just wanted to, thank both John and Al for coming out this evening. And as the committee can see, when we started this project, the three-phase project that we are undertaking, I mean, they really do fit together in terms of, they one piggybacks off at the other. So, I mean, it really does make sense that the fact that we are doing all three. And just to further highlight in terms of the CIP program, when we did start this project, we had sort of identified it as only an industrial CIP, and we immediately, along with our consultants here, identified that we were thinking just a little too smally, and we really wanted to help incentivize the whole community. So we are sort of obviously working towards that, and I think the nomenclature on that is still up in the air in terms of whole community or rural community CIP. But I look forward to continuing to work with both Al and John on these very important projects. So thank you.
Through Mr. Chairman, so I too want to echo some of Mr. Deaney's comments. Haven't had the chance to work with both you gentlemen that closely, but I want to thank both John and Al for being here. I think you highlight some good points, and your last comment about working with our DCs and our development charges process and kind of that overlay. So I think that'll be integral. I think it's another level of validation when we do go out to the community. One of the things that came out in your presentation was balance, and so that balance between ensuring we're providing the necessary servicing, ensuring we're investing where we need to invest. And some of the councillors highlighted the build it and they will come philosophy. There's a number of municipalities, I think, that are doing that in terms of the servicing, or at least on the servicing side. And I think that helps the pitch, it helps the sell, but that's something that, as we work with council, we will definitely get there. So that being said, the resourcing for CIPs is going to be something that we need to delve into, I think, a lot more in a lot more detail at some point. And so I thank you, and I look forward to kind of the rest of the work.
Thank you.
So thank you, gentlemen, for making the trip down from Toronto. You've got an engaged council here, and I think that we've put a pretty tough agenda in front of you as far as timelines are concerned and whatnot. And I really like the process that you've been going down, that the public opinion, the engaging the business community, and really getting the input from our stakeholders here. So keep up the good fight, and we really look forward to September and having both all three of the initiatives out in front of us. So
okay,
very good. Thank you.
Well, thank you for your time.
So I have a motion. Moved by Councillor Thompson and seconded by Councillor Foster that the delegations presented be received. Your pleasure on the motion? That is carried. Okay, tonight we have three reports. First report, sorry, I jumped over correspondence. There are no items of correspondence for this evening's agenda, so moving into reports. AD 1807, Team Niagara update. Are there any questions from committee members regarding this report? Seeing none, there is a question. Councillor Foster.
So, thank you. So, I guess this is to Mr. Deanny. So, it's interesting the meetings that you undertook and the travel to these places. So, I know economic development can sometimes be a little bit vague notion as we go down the road, or preparing things for the future type of thing. But from those things, what do you specifically think the positive gains are going to be from that?
Thank you for the question, Chair, through you to the committee members. So in terms of the travel that was undertaken with Team Niagara colleagues throughout the region and for specifically in the United States in March, which was also sort of predominantly funded by the department at the region. There were three separate missions, and the idea behind those ones on the consulate side was to really educate the consular officials in each of the three, or actually each of the four cities that they undertook, of which Lincoln went to Chicago, Minneapolis. So the idea was really to raise the profile of the Niagara region as a whole, and from my perspective, to raise the profile of Lincoln. So the idea being some foreign direct investment coming into our community. So what really was, the wins that we had on those ones were really some FDI lead generation that did occur. Some companies that went to these consular officials say, listen, we're looking to set up shop in Ontario and Canada, where can we go? And the idea is that they said, you should really check out Niagara because this is a great place to do business. So some of those leads that we're going to be fleshing out in a subsequent meeting, subsequent trip that we will be undertaking. But really, it's awareness generation, it's lead generation, and it's obviously working more closely with our colleagues throughout the region as well. So those are the three wins that we witnessed.
So, I'm almost going to sound like the mayor with this one, but I know the mayor likes to see metrics and things like that. So in the future, as you're looking at people coming and talking about this, I'm assuming that you're going to be hopefully going to be able to help track back some of these things as well. Like, I mean, I think it's really good that we're getting ourselves out there and making sure that we're seen as a presence type of thing, but it's also an expensive proposition to be doing a lot of this stuff. So, in the future, I guess it'll be kind of nice to see, okay, by the way, 5 years from now, this funnels back type of thing, and we can sort of say, and, as we're looking at it, saying, boy, that was a really good idea, sending Paul to do that type of thing. So I don't know how you judge that, but certainly there should be some metrics that are going on with things. So.
Yes, Chair, through you. Yeah, great point, and for sure. I mean, the metrics that I would be able to provide now obviously would be the meetings that we had and the generations and the subsequent meetings that we would be taking. But it actually, if it results in inbound meetings, that is, those interested investors coming into Niagara, most definitely we can report on those. And in addition to that, obviously, if we're looking out 5 years down the road, the hope is that these businesses would come and set up shop here. In addition to that, we also would be looking at any businesses that are currently in the region, and specifically, obviously, Lincoln, reaching out to those individuals to continue to thank them for their investment into the community, and obviously, push them to invest further. Yes, but metrics are 100% on our radar.
Mayor Easton.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I want to expand on what Councillor Foster had to say, because I've also been investing time in this very exercise, and yesterday it culminated in a discussion at the Wine Council. I was invited to the annual general meeting with the chief executive of Navigator Communications. So this is what I've been learning. First of all, I took out a subscription through the town on the Ontario Farmer. I think if you want to know very much about what's going on with farming, it's probably one of the most on-the-edge documents. You get accurate information. It comes from people who farm and really know what they're talking about. There's quite a bit of information on commodity markets, and it doesn't really have very much to do with tender fruit, but it does if you're looking for the macro. So I find that an extremely valuable piece, and there's not much left of it by the time I'm finished, because I'm cutting everything out, and Mike gets part of it, and it's all over his floor, and Paul gets it as well. So reading and absorbing is no different than what we did when we went on our trips. You just take in as much as you can, because eventually it starts to make sense. I had a meeting 2 weeks ago with Norm Beal. Norm Beal, as you know, owns Peninsula Ridge. He's also the head of Food and Beverage Ontario, and now Food and Beverage has joined together with the Ontario vegetable producers. I had a very, very interesting conversation with him, which fit in quite well with our initial idea that we should be purchasing. You talk about build and they will come, that we should be purchasing some land above the mountain, incentivizing for people to move up there, but really planning this at a very macro level so that we've got all the people involved. Norm told me that there really is, because I was giving him the gears about having such an interest in Eastern Ontario and why there wasn't much of a conversation down here. And he really related it to the fact that the farmers here, our farms are small, but they're not risk takers. The guys up there, obviously, and the women who are farming are obviously interested in more risk. So just think about that for a minute. So there are opportunities. So in terms of the vision, the fellow from Navigator, this is what he said yesterday. He said the reason that Doug Ford won is because people were feeling selfish. Why were they feeling selfish? Because they had been ignored for a long time in their mind. So there were quite a few little kernels in there, and I'm reading them and I'm thinking, you know what, as politicos, maybe we ought to pay attention to some of this. They're not interested in long-term vision. But even though they know you need vision, but they want to know how it's going to impact on them. So to Councillor Foster's comment, small gains, small to moderate risk, working with what you know and who you are, we're doing all this. I think we're doing the right things. It's a matter of somehow, when we're into this big picture macro thinking, that we bring ourselves to ground, and maybe these consultants can help us, or maybe we're going to have to go elsewhere. But certainly, if Mr. Deanny doesn't go out, if we don't go out, it's kind of like pulling the covers over your head. So we have to come to terms with the fact that when we're out there, we are really in earnest about the learning and being able to apply that. And I think we all know these things. But it just happened that I've had more time, and I'm trying to spend more of my time now looking at those big picture items, because in a few months, somebody's going to have to start talking about a new set of goals and objectives here. And we're not going to be in the weeds, and we're not going to be worried about operations. We just aren't, because you can now begin to see that our minds have got to be up here, and yet our policies have to be grounded down here. And I think that's going to be a really significant challenge. But I really feel that we can do this. This is a very exciting time for the town. I really do. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. And, you know, I think that the request for metrics is absolutely valid, you know, that we want to be measured on what we're trying to accomplish. And I think that will come out in the economic development strategy, you know, in any other strategy that we're putting together, whether that be tourism, whether that be commercial, industrial, whatever. And I think we've got to be careful, and this is not just for Mr. Deaney, but we've got to be careful pinning metrics to specific visits or specific engagements. And you know, the success we had coming out of Holland or the success we had coming out of China, we could pin successes to those specific visits, but that's not always going to happen. You know, it's going to be difficult for us if we're always looking back on, we spent this money, what did we get out of it? So to the mayor's comments, the metrics are going to be there. They are going to be higher level. They are going to be challenging. And, you know, it's going to be how does the town change as a result of what we're trying to do? Okay. I have Councillor Thompson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Now I want to jump in a little bit on this because I think that you kind of hit that on the head. If we get too granular on what we're attaching these metrics to, we'll end up saying, oh, well, we're just not going to do this anymore, right? Which doesn't further the whole end game. I kind of equate it to sales, where you know you're going to knock on 10 doors, and then your next one maybe is the one, right? And you've got to have that sort of determination and that drive and that consistency to keep doing the same that sort of thing in order to get those wins. That's not to say you should frivolously throw money around and go willy-nilly on it, but certainly, don't get too granular because you'll psych yourself right out of the whole process. So, my 2 cents.
Mr. Chairman, could I just make one other comment? When we look at the report under November 28th in terms of follow-up visits to Canada consulates in the United States, we already have a very good historic document that I think might be just to make a helpful comparison in terms of where things are already being exported to. It was really in quite a bit of detail. I have a copy in my office somewhere in the Center of Excellence file. But there has been a little bit of experience with this. That was done by the region, by the way, and there were visits, and there was quite an extensive map created. It would be interesting to see, what the comparisons might be on that. So I certainly don't have any problem supporting these visits for our economic development officer. I mean, there's no press here, but I have to tell you, we're very lucky to have Paul representing our interests, and so I think that there's a lot of value add to have him involved at the region, and so if he's out there, he's going to be seeing things that other people maybe won't. I think it's important for him to attend these things. Thank you.
Councillor Foster, you have the final word here.
Yeah, just I'm hearing kind of an interesting slant coming back in towards my comments, and I can tell you right off the bat, and as both the mayor and Councillor Thompson knows, I've been one of the big supporters of economic development within this municipality for a long time. So let's not take a look at what I'm saying as being some sort of a negative towards this, because I actually think this is hugely positive, okay? I think we have to get ourselves out there, but unfortunately there's this little group that's referred to as the electors that are coming up on October 22nd, and they come back to us and say, boy, you got to go to Holland, and what did you gain from that? Or you guys went to China, what did you gain from that? And by the way, we know what the expenses were because you guys are showing us what it is that's going on. So, I think it's really important that we can show the gains as we're going on. I think, developing some sort of either overall SOP or some sort of a metrics thing that we can sort of start judging over the next number of years, I think that's really important. And I think it protects you as staff, and it protects the politicians as well to really show this is the gain that it is that we've got with this. So just, yeah.
Yeah, I think we are.
I agree with what you're saying, but at the same time, not every visit is going to be a winner. And so, like what Dave was saying, you can knock on all those doors and be unsuccessful, but then bang, one of them is going to be just explode for us.
And yes, he is. And many times there is a value in relationship building, a huge value. So I'm going to call the motion. Oh.
I'm voting. You called me.
Okay, all right. Oh, did you have a comment?
Mr. Chairman, I mean, I always have a...
There, I just, I don't get a tug on the arm now.
No, through you, Mr. Chairman, so I apologize that I'm this far from you. I mean, I don't really have any significant comments to make other than to highlight. I think, from a staff perspective, what we take from Councillor Foster's comments is that value for money piece, and I think it's a point well made. It's a point we're definitely cognizant of. But it is part, whether it's travel, whether it's making sure that Lincoln remains something at the forefront of people's minds when they think of Niagara. It is about a broad-based strategy. It's not about the individual trips per se. And you're right, we've been a little bit lucky, and a lot of this is luck. It is about putting ourselves out there, but I think making sure that it is part of a broad strategy is where we're definitely going. So however we incorporate those metrics and demonstrate that value, we'll make sure that that's what we come back with.
So I have a motion moved by Councillor Thompson and seconded by Councillor Foster that report AD 1807 regarding Team Niagara be received for information. Your pleasure on the motion? That is carried. Our next report is report AD 18-08 Economic Development Strategy Update, and we heard quite a bit of that tonight. Is there any questions to this motion, or this report, pardon me? Seeing none, I have a motion moved by Councillor Pachariva and seconded by Councillor McMillan that report AD 18-08 regarding the Economic Development Strategy Update be received for information. Your pleasure on the motion. That is carried. And the final report number AD 18-09, the Magic Wine Bus Report. Any questions to the report? No questions? Mr. Deanny would like to speak to it.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Through you to the committee. So the Magic Wine Bus, which actually is going to be branded the 20 Valley Magic Wine Bus, is actually an operation that for the past 4 years has been operating out of the Annapolis Valley in Nova Scotia. And I had caught wind that they were sort of looking to expand into Ontario. They were looking at other wine regions throughout the province, and through some lobbying and communication with them, they thankfully had chose Lincoln and the 20 Valley to sort of operate their first English double-decker style bus in Ontario here in our community, which is fantastic. So they are looking at for starting July 4th, so the week of July 4th, operating for 3 months on Wednesdays, Thursdays, and Fridays from some 10 a.m. to about 6 p.m. And they will have some non-exclusive use of our parking lot in Jordan, which we have done some sort of cosmetic maintenance to it over the past few days with our colleagues in Public Works. And they will be signing a lease agreement. We will be looking at some sort of cost recovery for recovering some of the costs in terms of that maintenance. But this is a great news story for our community. It sort of builds into our tourism offering. They have selected 4 wineries for this season. We'll be looking to expand that next season, providing they get some success, which I'm confident they will. And in the report, you see some of the economic indicators that they've had in the Annapolis Valley over the past 4 years. So we look forward to experiencing those same numbers here in our community.
Councillor Foster.
Yes, thank you. And if I missed it, I'm sorry, but what are the 4 wineries that they're going to be doing this year?
So Chair, through you to the committee member, Redstone Winery, Megalomaniac, Vinny Estates, and Vineland Estates.
That's a good selection. That's good. Thank you.
Councillor Pachariva?
Yeah, what does the ticket cost? Didn't say in the report anywhere.
Chairman, through you to the committee member, I'd look on the website, but I think it's about $60 a ticket. 50, 60. Yeah.
Can hop on.
Do you have to take?
So I think this is outstanding, and you know what? They chose Lincoln. They didn't choose Niagara-on-the-Lake. They didn't choose Prince Edward County. They chose us to be the first in Ontario. So you know, I think that's a big win. So well done. I have a motion moved by Councillor McMillan and seconded by Councillor Pachariva that report AD 18-09 regarding the Magic Wine Bus be received for information. Your pleasure on the motion. And this motion has nothing to do with the Prime Minister's announcement today.
That'd be another
There you are. Okay. Councillor inquiries. Are there any councillor inquiries this evening? Councillor Foster?
It's not so much an inquiry or anything, but I just, unfortunately, I wasn't at the meeting on Monday night, and I am remiss not to have been able to say some kind words about Wayne as he's moving out of his role. I've enjoyed being with Wayne on council for my entire time. It's always been a love-hate relationship. We've always loved to get along at times and always loved to battle things out. But the reason that I'm saying anything at this moment is it was very interesting with one of the delegations early this evening about the Gateway, and there's an awful lot of institutional memory that comes into play that is going to be walking out the door with Wayne. It'll be similar with me as with the role that I'm going to be moving to and no longer being sort of a direct part of town council, but hopefully if I get elected into the other. But there's reasons why things happen. The Gateway was an unmitigated disaster for our municipality when we got involved with it in the first place. And so, you know, always make sure as we're going on that you look back and you know, for goodness sakes, give Wayne a call, because he'll give you the lowdown on what's happened and why some of these things have happened as well. But anyway, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Foster.
Thank you.
Are there any notices of motion? Seeing none. Any announcements? Seeing none. So we do have a closed session scheduled for this evening. So I have a motion moved by Mayor Easton, seconded by Councillor Pachariva. The committee adjourned to closed session to address a proposed or pending acquisition or disposition of land by the municipality or local board as it pertains to a review of surplus town-owned lands. And we will be moving into the Beansville room for closed session. You do have 5 minutes, yes. Oh, I'm sorry. Your pleasure on the motion? And that is carried. Thank you, Julie.